Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Happy Friday. Today is May 10th and we have some more NBA action to dive into. We had two games take place last night where we saw both the Cavaliers and Mavericks win to even up their series, headed back to their home courts, potentially taking the series advantage. We also saw the Phoenix Suns, a little bit unsurprisingly, but not necessarily in a great way, fire their head coach Frank Vogel after the team was swept by the Timberwolves in the first round just a week and a half ago or so, and already hire the replacement. So we're going to be diving into their decision there. And then finally, we have some injury updates on the New York Knicks, and I want to talk about the overall playoff picture with them, as they have just been hit with injury after injury, which is super unfortunate because they are, of course, one of the top teams, at least in the Eastern Conference, and they just cannot seem to catch a break. But before we get into the show, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Help us continue to grow this channel. For any of our viewers, feel free to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happening on sports. Make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated. We're going to be starting off the show today by talking about the Boston Celtics dropping Game 2 as the Cleveland Cavaliers end up evening up the series. And this is something that, frankly, as much as the talent would absolutely say that the Celtics should easily be able to handle this series, they just cannot seem to get out of their own way. Now, I definitely do want to give credit to the Cavaliers where it's due, but I feel like the overall bigger picture here is the fact that the Boston Celtics, it seems like a little bit of a broken record, that they can't seem to fully get out of their own way. And when they dropped Game 2 against the Miami Heat, that seemed like it should be the wake-up call to sort of help put the Celtics in the right direction. They were coming into the postseason after having the 1 seed locked up for just about a month. So, maybe needing a wake-up call is justifiable there. And they have been dominant in just about every win that they've had in the playoffs so far. But still, they just can't seem to, actually have that mentality of, on a nightly basis, go out and do your job. And last night, they end up losing 118-94. This was a tied game at half. And then the Cavaliers just ran away with it, as Celtics had a very bad three-point shooting night. They were just 8 of 35. Now, again, credit to the Cavaliers for playing a role in that. It seemed like they were putting in their best effort to run the Celtics off of the three-point line a little bit. We know how much the Celtics love to shoot threes. They averaged just about 42.5 during the regular season. Attempts, that is, from three during the regular season. Last night shot 35, so 7 under their average during the regular season last night. And it was just a poor performance from a lot of their key shooters. We saw Derek White sort of finally come back to earth. He was on an absolute heater from the end of that Miami series, even through Game 1. But last night, he really struggled from three. He was 1 of 3. Jaylen Brown was 0 of 6 as well. So at the end of the day, the 2024 version of the NBA is there's going to be three-point variance that sometimes is just unavoidable. But it seems like the Celtics, and granted, they are missing Kristaps Porzingis, who does play a part in what I'm about to say, but the idea of, at times, we've seen the Celtics be able to sort of at least add another layer to their game. And again, Porzingis plays a big part in the idea of being able to attack the paint. Without him, they are more limited. And last night was just sort of the old version of the Celtics, where they seemed very disjointed. It didn't seem like they were able to get quality looks when the shots weren't available on the perimeter. And the Cavs were, like I mentioned, blitzing the Celtics very hard to run them off of the three-point line. And Evan Mobley had a tremendous game. Obviously, the offensive numbers are going to stick out for him. A career high in terms of a playoff performance, 21 points in this game. But just as importantly, he was playing a massive role for the Cavaliers on defense, where he was contesting just about everything at the rim and at times in that mid-range as well. And that being said, Mobley was tremendous, and I want to touch on it more as we go on here, but there was a point in the third quarter with just about 5 minutes left where Mobley picked up a couple fouls on back-to-back defensive possessions that had him have to go out and sit. And during that time, the Celtics still weren't able to really get anything going offensively. Now, credit again to the Cavaliers for the defense they played, but the Celtics, it just seemed like they were settling for all of these bad shots. They were settling for a lot of mid-ranges, and that is not the game that they're used to. They were 29th in the NBA in mid-range frequency during the regular season. So, again, overall, it was just a very sloppy Celtics game. And the thing is, it wasn't even just they didn't even turn the ball over very often. They only turned it over, I believe it was 7 times in this game. So when I say sloppy, it's not that they were, giving the Cavaliers their opportunities. It was just the shot quality on a consistent basis wasn't there. The execution wasn't there. Now, there are a bunch of fingers that you can point. Don't want to overreact to one game necessarily, but we're seeing a couple players in particular that are struggling right now. The big conversation is, of course, Jason Tatum. Now, I thought that he was fine last night again, where it's not that he put out a bad performance necessarily. 25 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists. He did a lot of his damage from the free throw line, which was not a bad thing because he was driving in to the rim, and it was clear that he was frustrated with his finishing himself, and that's been a conversation for the past few games here. But then he just it looked like he got discouraged and sort of abandoned it. Went to the free throw line 10 times in the first half, only 1 in the second half. So for Tatum, I don't know what it is with him. There's definitely a level of frustration from Celtics fans, but he himself is frustrated with the way that he is sort of putting the ball in the net right now. And I don't think that he's been bad by any means, but it just does not seem like he has that mental edge right now. And the efficiency that we've seen from him since his rookie season, and the Celtics have been in this playoff picture. So at the end of the day, the Celtics are a team that at least does have a lot of depth, despite what Tatum said after the post game, which was sort of, I didn't like personally the fact that he was sort of trying to downplay this super team idea. And I understand not having, being cocky, but confidence is a big thing. And I don't know, I probably personally would have rathered he said that, we just weren't good tonight and we know that we're the better team and we can get back there. But instead he's talking about regular season awards, how they only had 2 All-Stars, and just all of these other conversations that I would have preferred to see more of a level of accountability from him. Accountability is going to be something we talk about as the show goes on when we get into this Suns conversation. But, it is what it is right now for Tatum. Again, they can pass by for so long, considering the fact that they are the 1 seed in a less talented Eastern Conference. They don't necessarily need him to be the guy in terms of at least lead scoring every single game. But as the playoffs go on here, they are going to need him to perform more. And, we're going to have to sort of wait and see when he does decide to take it to this next level. Other player briefly here, again, don't want to bury anybody, 7 or so games into the playoffs, but we are seeing some regression from Jrue Holiday. They gave him this contract extension right at the end of the regular season, and hasn't been great for him so far, and this is a story because historically Jrue Holiday has been somebody that has had a little bit of a reputation of falling off some when the postseason comes around. Throughout his career, his shooting splits 46% from the field, 37% from three. Then when you get to the playoffs, dips down to 42% and 33%. So far through the first 7 playoff games, he is shooting 36-32 clips. So definitely not efficient. His finishing at the rim is just abysmal right now, and that's definitely a theme for a lot of the Celtics players right now. And like I said, credit Evan Mobley for the defense that he's been playing at the rim as well, but underwhelming for sure for the Celtics. But on the Cavs side of this equation as well, I love this game for Donovan Mitchell. He had a clear emphasis in the first half versus the second half of, in the first half, he wanted to help elevate his teammates, try and get them involved. It has been a lot of the Donovan Mitchell show to start off these playoffs, and he was trying to get the playmaking going a little bit more. Had 8 assists in this game, most he's had since early April. April 10th, I believe, was the exact date when they played the Memphis Grizzlies. And there were real struggles going on with these other players. Darius Garland, we've talked about the fact that his efficiency has been way down as of late, and he was able to have himself a little bit of a bounce back game thanks to Donovan Mitchell as well. Mitchell then, of course, when he felt like it was time to sort of step on the Celtics and pull away from this game, he got himself going in the third quarter again, was really feeling himself from 3, and once he hit that banked 3 where he was coming along the perimeter, it almost looked like he kind of stopped dead in his tracks because he was expecting Jaylen Brown, I should say, to carry his momentum through Mitchell and end up drawing the foul. Instead, he sort of shoots an awkward jump shot but ends up banking it in. I believe that was at the beginning of the fourth. I believe it was beginning of the fourth. Could have been. I know he also had that step back at the end of the third quarter as well. But at that point, it just felt like it was over for the Celtics, and just doesn't feel like they have that sort of mental makeup to be able to pull off these comebacks. But again, for Mitchell, loved what he did in this game. I thought the way that he and the Cavaliers as a whole really ran that pick and roll game, that was something that we were sort of looking at after game 1. The fact that the Celtics were leaving a lot open on the 3-point line, and that was part of it, but also the fact that they were getting to the paint at will as well. And Celtics definitely need to sort of look at some of the lineup stuff with them. The double bigs of Luke Cornett and Al Horford, I just don't really understand what you're trying to do in those minutes, and especially because you're not taking away the paint. Evan Mobley has definitely enjoyed the matchup against Luke Cornett up to this point. Saw him getting himself going in the fourth quarter the other night. Now last night, like I mentioned, career high playoffs-wise, 21 points in this game, so that was great to see for him. Like I mentioned, Garland, especially in that third quarter, was getting the threes to fall as well. He ends up 5 of 8 from the field, 4 of 8 from 3. Still probably has another level to go up to, but at the same time, it was just baby steps here after some really rough Garland performances, and now they're going to go back to Cleveland, where they have been an incredible home team, at least through the Orlando Magic series, so they definitely have a chance to potentially, really put the pressure on the Boston Celtics. Now, interesting, again, when we talk about 3-point variance, the 2 times the Celtics have lost so far in this postseason have been with opponents shooting incredibly well from 3. It was a historic mark for the Miami Heat when they stole Game 2 from the Celtics. This time around, the Heat, when the starters left the game, they were 13 of 25 from 3, so they were also red hot, above 50%, but also ultimately here, that's not too much of an excuse because it's the Celtics being willing to give up these looks to the players they don't think are going to burn them, and you just can't give away these types of games. And I understand for the Cavaliers, they were 15th out of 16 playoff teams in terms of three-point shooting heading into that game 2 matchup, but you got to put some pressure on them, and you can't just give them these wide open looks, especially when you go back to Cleveland, where it feels like the rim is just always a little bit bigger for that home team. So I don't think the Celtics are going to have too much of an issue coming back, but at the same time, this inconsistency that they have is definitely a cause for concern, whether you want to look at it from the perspective of this series or the playoffs as a whole. You look at in the Western Conference where Anthony Edwards is giving quotes about how he just wants to kill everything in front of him, and Tatum is sort of downplaying the talent that is on the Celtics roster. It seems like not cut from the same cloth right now, and it is definitely a concern. We have these concerns about the Celtics just about every year. Seemed like maybe that game 2 in the Heat series was the wake-up call, but Celtics come out flat again and are now headed into Cleveland needing to take at least one of them, but probably need to take both of them. I don't think that they should have too much of a problem doing so, but definitely a possibility. Let me know what you think in the comment section about the rest of this series. Their Game 3 matchup, if I can double check real quick, is going to be Saturday night, so we'll see how this plays out for them. But on that note, we are going to be taking our first break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, I want to talk about the late game from last night, which saw the Oklahoma City Thunder losing as well at home to the Dallas Mavericks. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, getting my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Now moving on to the game last night between the Dallas Mavericks and Oklahoma City Thunder, which saw the Mavericks coming out on top in this one. I was pretty concerned about the Mavericks coming out of Game 1 for the specific reason that the Luka injury is definitely hovering over them, but last night it seemed like he sort of got his groove back a little bit, despite the fact that he is clearly still not fully healthy. Coming into the series, it was the concern about that right knee that's sprained for him. And then during the game, he rolled his ankle at one point in transition. That was really bothering him as well. His left knee was bleeding from the first half on. He ended up hitting his head early in the game as well, so he was getting all kinds of tossed around. This was a pretty physical game. I feel like a lot of people have been talking about the refs a lot, myself included, but I do prefer when we get to see the players actually play a more physical game, as long as it doesn't go over the top. And I think that the refs are doing a little bit of a better job swallowing their whistle. But Luka was able to, at least in that first quarter, find his touch once again. He ended up having one of, if not, I would say probably his best playoff game. Now, a lot of it did come in that first quarter, scoring 16 points. He hit his first 3 threes and really got himself going then. He finished the game with 29 points total, shot 11 of 21 from the field, 5 of 8 from 3. This is just his second game in the postseason, shooting over 43% from the field. His first game shooting over 36% from 3. Definitely has been struggling with efficiency through the first series plus one game against the Thunder, where his shooting splits for the season were 49-38, and he has not looked like the same version of himself. Last night, he at least was able to recover some of that. Again, first quarter is where he got a lot of his damage done. Second and third quarter, he was a little bit more quiet, but that's where we saw the others step up for them in a big way. PJ Washington, in his first ever postseason, considering he spent the first handful of years of his career playing with Charlotte, he puts together a massive performance, 29 points, 11 of 18 from the field, 7 of 11 from 3. That ties his career high in three-pointers made. Definitely his biggest game of the series up to this point, so was good to see there for him. Tim Hardaway Jr. was also very impactful, as well as he really got himself going after a pretty subpar game one, I would say. Now, to his defense, he was coming back from that high ankle sprain that he suffered in game 2 against the Clippers, but especially in the third quarter is when we saw him sort of take his game to that next level. He did a really good job, I thought, getting himself some looks in transition, and the person who set him up on both of those transition looks that I'm referring to was Kyrie Irving, where if you didn't watch the game, probably were a little unimpressed looking at the box score for him, but ultimately I think that Kyrie's impact in this game went far beyond the box score, where he was just sort of operating the game as a whole, especially in these non-Luka minutes, knowing that he was dealing with the injuries that he is. He was one of, if not, honestly, the most impactful player for the Mavericks, where, you know, I think that we know that Kyrie can get himself buckets anytime he wants to, but in this game, he was sort of operating as a true point guard and finding the hot hands in, again, specifically PJ Washington and Tim Hardaway Jr., but Kyrie finishes this game only 9 points, 2 of 8 from the field, but 11 assists, and I also thought that his defensive impact is something that we're seeing him take a ton of pride in right now. Every time he was basically speaking to the media during the Clippers series, he was bringing up his attention to defense, and we've seen that carry over to this Oklahoma City Thunder series, where he ends up with 2 steals, 2 blocks. It seemed like anytime he would get beat off the dribble, he was using those hands, and it was pointed out by the broadcasting crew, the fact that he was able to sort of just swipe the ball away. And it was just, again, really encouraging to see Kyrie, again, with his understanding. He's one of the veterans in this NBA playoffs, considering all of the youth talent that is surrounding the game right now. And you can see that, you know, this locked-in version of Kyrie has just been so fun to watch, and the fact that he is able to impact the game in different ways. And it's been, again, when you talk about his defense too, you know, and that last night wasn't even necessarily the most tremendous defensive performance from the Mavericks, but the defense has been a conversation with them from the beginning of the season, and now obviously the mid-season additions of PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford have done tons for them, but Kyrie as well, and his level of buy-in on defense has been a big impact on that. And then he ends up grabbing the offensive rebound with a minute left that sort of helps to kill off a little bit extra time and help the Mavericks close out this game. So, I wouldn't say I pronounced the Mavericks dead. I felt a lot better about my pick of the Thunder after game 1, but I was really worried about this Luka situation. We know that the efficiency with him just has not been there. Again, the 3-point shooting has been really rough for him, and it's very uncharacteristic as well, which is why I think that last night was a step in the right direction. Now he's still shooting 41-27 shooting splits in the postseason so far, so I wouldn't say that it's no concerns, especially considering the fact that it is very clear Luka is dealing with injuries even still, but a positive step in the right direction, no doubt. But on the Thunder side of this game, it ultimately for them, it was the Mavericks shooting that sort of did them in. We just talked about the 3-point variance in the previous segment, talking about that Celtics Cavaliers game, when the Mavericks are going to shoot 18 of 37 from the 3-point line. That is just incredibly difficult to put up with. And this was a stat from the Ringer that I believe there have been 51 games that have taken place in the playoffs so far. In those 51 games, 41 of them have seen the team that hits more 3-point shots wins the game. As much as we all enjoy basketball, it is in large part comes down to who is going to hit more threes. They're probably going to win the game. And it was a tough look for the Thunder here, where it's just at some point, their defense can definitely step up, but you're only so limited when PJ Washington is going to have a career night like he did. And I would say this, it's now headed back to Dallas, so the Thunder should be concerned, but at the same time, I do believe that they are the better team. Now, in terms of a potential concern with them, the offensive rebounds for that the Thunder allow has been a story surrounding them for the majority of the regular season. And last night, it was only a slight rebound margin for the Mavericks, but they were able to grab 12 offensive rebounds, especially some big ones in the fourth quarter as well. So that part of the game has to be better for them. And the Thunder, it's clear that there is a level of inexperience with them. Chet Holmgren really struggled last night, and he can still have a defensive presence, but at the same time, offensively, when he is not feeling himself, he is very ineffective. He was 4 of 12 from the field, 1 of 6 from 3. I mentioned spacing is going to be such a big part of this Thunder team in this series, because as much as you can pull Daniel Gafford out of the paint for Dallas, is a must for them, which is part of the reason why we did see them choose to take Josh Giddey out of the starting lineup for the second half. It was Aaron Wiggins starting in his place. Giddey only played 11 minutes in this game, played 17 in game 1, so maybe it's a matchup thing, but it does feel like we are sort of headed to a crossroads here with the Thunder, where I can't imagine he's going to be in Oklahoma City for the foreseeable future. I think they're probably going to want to cash out on a little bit of his value and maybe try and get somebody who can be a more reliable fifth starter. And I like Aaron Wiggins a lot. I shouted him out during last game, and he was great last game as well. So it's not like I was the only one. Looking back on it here, I'm trying to see. He ended up scoring 16 points off the bench, so I'm definitely not breaking any news there, but feels like you probably want somebody maybe with a little bit more high-end talent than Wiggins. And again, I like Aaron Wiggins a lot, but I do feel like there's just such a limit that as a fifth starter, I just think that the Thunder can do better. So, it was Chet underperforming. It was the Josh Giddey unreliability, And ultimately, again, it was just the 3-point shooting. So I don't overreact to this game. If you are a Thunder fan, I still feel like they win this one. I had them in 6 coming into it. Now, makes it interesting, the fact that Dallas is able to take this series back home with a chance to take a potential 3-1 lead. Now, I feel like the Thunder can put up a good fight. We do have to see, like, again, as much as it is a huge positive to see Luka Doncic, having this health come back for him, but or at least not the health, but the shooting stroke coming back for him. He is dealing with health, and hopefully he is able to continue to build on it, but I'm not going to fully declare that he is back until we see a little bit of consistency with it. But we will see. That's all we have on this one. Let us know in the comment section what your thoughts on this series are. They play Saturday afternoon, so a little bit of a quick turnaround, which probably does favor Oklahoma City a little bit considering the whole health impact of this series. But we are going to be now taking our second break, and when we come back on the other side, want to dive into the Phoenix Suns conversation as they chose to fire Frank Vogel yesterday. Already do have their replacement, so stick with us and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just talked about both of the NBA games from last night. Now I want to switch to a little bit more of the news front, as we got some news from the Suns yesterday where they fired head coach Frank Vogel after just one season. They brought him in on a 5-year deal last offseason in early June, and now are already done with him less than a full year later. So they have already named his replacement. They bring in Mike Budenholzer, so we're going to touch on that a little bit more in depth in a moment here. But the Suns are now going to be heading into their 3rd consecutive season with a different head coach. They've had 6 in the last 10 years, so this organization has just constantly been cycling through these head coaches, and even when it seemed like they had one in Monty Williams, they end up parting ways there because of the fact that it comes down to this postseason success. Even though Monty Williams was part of the group that was able to bring the Suns to the finals in 2021, they felt like they were underachieving. There was definitely a lot of friction. I know, at least on the DeAndre Ayton front. Now, they end up trading Ayton in the offseason anyways, but they just continue to cycle through all of these different head coaches. It seems like that organization has, ever since really that season where they brought in Chris Paul and made that finals run, they have definitely been struggling with a level of consistency, and I think to some degree a level of accountability. Sort of alluded to that earlier in the show, but a level of accountability with their star players. Now, I don't include Devin Booker in the conversation quite as much, even though you can make an argument that he has been with, I want to say, at least 6 different head coaches since he was drafted. I believe possibly going into number 7. Again, I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I want to sort of point to Kevin Durant here where, at least an interesting note, I'm not saying he was responsible for Vogel getting fired himself, but KD is now going to be playing under his 6th head coach in 6 seasons next year. It was Kenny Atkinson when he first came to Brooklyn, was obviously dealing with injuries in that first year, so don't know how much you can really put on him there. But then he advocates for bringing in Steve Nash, and then by the next offseason is already sort of disassociated with him, was making some power trips in terms of the front office, saying either one of you got to go or I'm going to go, plays half the season there. Once Kyrie bails, he does as well, and is now sort of shuffling through the Phoenix head coaches as well. So, I defend Kevin Durant, I think, more than the average person in terms of the talent that he is. Specifically, that decision, I don't love it, but I understand the move to Golden State more than most people do, I feel like, and I've talked about it plenty on this podcast, so I don't necessarily want to dive into all of it once again, but as much slack as LeBron James gets for having his head coaches fired, we have seen Kevin Durant really cycling through these head coaches. He has had more head coaches than any other player in the NBA over the last 10 years. It's going to be 9, I believe, when Mike Budenholzer takes over. No, 9 can't be right, but I think it's 8, maybe going on 9. It's been a lot, to say the least, for Kevin Durant over the past decade. And, as for the team decision, because again, don't know necessarily who exactly is responsible for the Vogel hiring. It seems like Ishbia and that front office itself is also sort of treading water, having problems in this new regime. But I didn't think the Suns even really had a bad regular season. They win 49 games. They're dealing with Devin Booker injuries early on. Brad Beal was also struggling to stay on the court there for whatever that's worth. I know that a lot of people are very soured on Brad Beal because of how the playoffs turned out. I was never necessarily all that high on him to begin with coming into the year, but it was this shuffling of the cards of what we've seen from the year prior, and obviously Vogel wasn't a part of that 2023 team, but still though, feels like there was a lot of meshing that had to take place on the court, especially considering the fact that the roster construction wasn't necessarily all that friendly for trying to get all these players to build up chemistry. They had problems far beyond just the chemistry of their top 3 players, because they were dealing with no real point guard, and it wasn't really a real big man game. Again, I feel like I like Nurkic maybe a little bit more than the average NBA fan, and they didn't have much off of the bench whatsoever. So, as for Vogel in this season, again, 49 wins in the Western Conference for how deep it was is very solid, especially when they were facing playoff teams in each of their last 10 games of the regular season, and they were able to stay above, actually pull themselves out of the play-in threshold to at least guarantee them a postseason spot. And I think that Vogel has probably been one of the, more underappreciated, I guess you can say, coaches. Now, I'm not saying he's any sort of a mastermind, but it seems like he has had a tough stretch here of being the scapegoat. I think that that's what he was in LA when he was fired from the Lakers, and now I think that that's what's happening here in Phoenix as well. And it comes down to the postseason production here, obviously, and if they are able to, I don't know, I'm curious how many games they would have had to win against the Timberwolves for him to keep his job. He seemed pretty confident that he was going to be able to retain his job for a while there, but obviously that's not the case. And, again, as this Timberwolves postseason pushes on, I know that a lot of people are sort of clamoring for the idea of apologizing to the Suns because, maybe they're not quite as bad as we thought, and they were given a lot of slack because of getting swept. I'm not really of that belief I do think that there are real problems with this team. The flaws that we saw during the regular season showed up in the postseason again. Again, all of those things that I listed, the fact that they were the worst fourth quarter team in the league. They didn't know how to close out games. And again, I do think that in large part it boils down to the fact that they didn't have any true playmaker to be able to run their offense, and they were relying heavily on the individual shot creation of their star players, especially considering that one of their star players is Bradley Beal, who is making $50+ million over the next few seasons for the Suns, and is just not the same level of all-star, all-NBA caliber player that he was for a lot of his career. So I don't really know how a coaching change here is going to rectify the situation for the Suns. Now, there were reports that Vogel maybe didn't mesh with his players well, likely talking about Durant, Booker, and Beal. So if that is the case, that definitely played a role. Like I mentioned, the whole Kevin Durant, 6 coaches in 6 seasons. Who is he really going to mesh with? Because, him and Steve Nash were supposedly, really close in him getting his first ever head coaching job, and then he just turned very quickly on that in a year. So I'm not really sure what the deal is going to be there. Now, the Suns are a mess with or without Vogel. They don't have much of a future considering all of the draft capital that they've traded off in recent years in order to create this roster that has all of the star power for it, but doesn't necessarily have the logical means to be able to be a championship contender, at least as things currently stand in May. Maybe they have some sort of historic offseason where they pull something off, but I find that a little bit hard to believe. They don't have any control over their draft picks until 2031. Now, they're going to have some first-round picks along the way there. Most of them, if not all of them, involved in pick swaps, so we will see with that. They also enter next year paying out a ton of money to their current roster, $209 million. Again, that's just in May. That's prior to making any type of offseason moves. But that $209 million is the most expensive out of any other team in the league. I think that it's going to be an extremely tough task for them here to come back from it, but either way, Vogel is out. They bring in Mike Budenholzer. They officially hired him Friday morning. So on the note of sort of that fit, I do find it interesting to see, Budenholzer is somebody who has a reputation of being a little bit stubborn at times. That's what helped lead to his undoing in Milwaukee. But at the same time, we saw Budenholzer be able to lead the Bucks to that 2021 championship, and he has multiple Coach of the Year awards under his belt as well. So I do believe that he is somebody who can absolutely be capable of at least trying to rectify the situation. Curious what defensively, because obviously one of the most famous things about Budenholzer is his defensive philosophies, the heavy drop coverage. Now, you don't have a Brook Lopez necessarily in the paint to be the same level of a rim protector, but I do think that Nurkic at times can, flash some positive things, so I'm curious how that's going to fit into the equation. And I don't know how much the vibes per se in terms of Vogel didn't mesh with his players, like what is going to unlock, and maybe it's Bradley Beal just being more healthy and being able to sort of find a little bit of a vintage version of himself. If they are able to go out and find a point guard somewhere along the way, that would be huge. They just don't really have the resources for it either. Now, Devin Booker has absolutely improved on his playmaking over the recent seasons, so I don't know if I ever see him as a true point guard, but if he can at least run a little bit more of a team offense, that would be a positive development for the Suns. I think that they are very much handicapped, and I'm not really sure how this is going to get better for the Suns, not just this season, but if it's not this season, they don't really have a future. They need to capitalize now. Puts a ton of pressure on Budenholzer. Speaking of pressure, I'm a little bit surprised that he ended up taking this job, but there is at least NBA-ready talent, and the options for him were between this and the Los Angeles Lakers, where he was the front-runner to be the next Lakers head coach. Now, that's obviously not the case, so the Lakers remain on the search for a head coach. I know that at least odds-wise, I forget exactly which sports book I was looking at. I think it was DraftKings, that JJ Redick was second in terms of head coaching odds to be with the Lakers, and Budenholzer was at the top of the list, but Redick was number 2. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Lakers sort of play this out. If you're JJ Redick, I don't know necessarily if this is the real time you want to make your step into coaching. Now, obviously, he has that reputation or relationship, I should say, with LeBron James anyways, that I'm sure he would have some level of respect already walking in the room there. But that is quite the spot to walk into that I'm just not really sure if that is the way to go for him. Other names out there, at least, there's been the Ty Lue sort of rumors that have circulated out there, but it sounds like there's mutual interest from both Lue and the Clippers to bring him back. So not really sure there. There was some buzz earlier this week about how multiple teams, not the Lakers specifically, but multiple teams, if the Timberwolves were to part ways with Chauncey Billups, that could be a potential landing spot. Would definitely be an interesting one for me. I could potentially get behind that. And then the other one is Kevin Young. I don't necessarily know all too much about Young. He was definitely in a lot of head coaching conversations last offseason. He was the lead assistant behind Monty Williams in Phoenix before he was fired there. So we could potentially see Young end up with the Lakers, but I don't think that is going to happen necessarily. If I'm not mistaken, Young may have just taken a job in college as well. So again, it's just kind of messy here and for the Lakers moving forward. And I'm not saying, ultimately for the Lakers, the head coach probably isn't their number one issue. I know that Darvin Ham was definitely sort of torn to shreds on his way out of LA, and I wasn't a fan of Ham myself, but I feel like you just need to have some level of competency there, and the Lakers could be at least in the conversation of being fun. I just feel like their championship window may have already passed them. Obviously, when you have the talent of both LeBron James and Anthony Davis, you can't fully count them out, but I'm definitely not counting them in myself. But let me know what you think about this. Should Frank Vogel have been fired from the Phoenix Suns? How is Mike Budenholzer going to help the team moving forward? And what should the Lakers do with their head coaching vacancy now that their number one option is off the board? But we are going to now be taking our final break of the show. And when we come back on the other side, I want to give some updates on the injuries surrounding both the Knicks' OG Anunoby and Jalen Brunson, and sort of have a bigger discussion about this Knicks postseason run. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Headed into our final segment of the day. We're going to be giving some injury updates for the New York Knicks and asking the question, can they overcome this slew of injuries they have unfortunately been put up against, where we've known, really since Julius Randle left the team months ago that it was going to be a little bit more of a limited Knicks roster to try and make this postseason run, but things have just continued to get more complicated for them with the injury to Mitchell Robinson. He has been ruled out for the remainder of the postseason, and then during Game 2 the other night, we saw two of the Knicks starters dealing with injuries. First, it was Jalen Brunson, who had a foot injury that we still don't have a ton of information on what exactly happened, what exactly it is, but he was able to return for the second half after missing the entire second quarter and seemed to be, even though he was laboring some on that foot, he was at least, a productive version of himself. But he is listed as questionable. I would imagine he's going to play. Game 3 is tonight in Indiana, so we will have information on that in the coming hours. But less positive is the fact that OG Anunoby went down with a hamstring injury late in the third quarter of that Game 2 matchup, and he's been ruled out with a strain in that left hamstring. Now, the Knicks have a 2-0 lead over the Pacers as things currently stand in Indiana. It seems like they are maybe a little bit more willing. There's some more wiggle room, I should say, in terms of them being able to get away with a potential loss. But obviously, it would help them a lot now that the Celtics even just dropped a game to the Cavaliers if they could get as much time as possible, sort of getting ahead of the Celtics in terms of schedule and trying to rest up a little bit more. On the Celtics end, they would like to be the first ones done with their series because they are waiting on Kristaps Porzingis to come back from the soleus strain. So both of these teams a little bit banged up, but for the Knicks, before they can even necessarily think about what's going on with that Celtics situation, they do have to make sure that they are able to hold off the Pacers in this series, where I know they take the 2-0 lead, but I do feel like the Pacers have played pretty well. Now, absolutely, they have to be sort of kicking themselves that neither one of those games they were able to come away with. Game 1, really up until the fourth quarter, that seemed like their game. They got incredible bench production, and it wasn't until the final few minutes where, yes, as we know, some calls sort of went the other way for them. This is something I meant to bring up on the show yesterday, but how about the report that the Pacers have filed a complaint for 78 calls over the first two games? Just absolutely ridiculous stuff. And listen, I understand refereeing can definitely feel slanted against you, but to put out an extensive list like that is definitely a bit much in my eyes. Now, again, I understand the frustration that can come with refereeing at times, but Pacers are they do have themselves to blame because, listen, I've always had this philosophy. I don't believe that refereeing can fully give the game away. I was kind of shocked to see Brian Windhorst on ESPN specifically come out and say on national television that the refs cost the Pacers Game 1, and they definitely made some calls down the stretch there that were incredibly questionable. It was the kickball violation where it was clearly not a kickball. It was Neesmith's hand that hit the ball. And then the illegal screen call that had a lot of people mad. So listen, again, I understand how frustrating that can be, but it just seems, a bit much for them to be so mad about the referees as a whole, where seems like they have been underachieving with opportunities to close out either one of these games. So again, maybe some calls down the stretch of Game 1, but Tyrese Halliburton only scored 6 points in that game, was not effective whatsoever. He is more involved in Game 2, but ultimately, even with the injuries to Anunoby, who was really good in that game, you missed Jalen Brunson for a stretch of that. The Pacers have the halftime lead. Brunson comes back, and they just had no answers for him, and the Knicks continued to sort of light it up against them from the three-point line late in that game. So the Knicks are minus 320 favorites, according to DraftKings, to win this series against the Pacers. I feel like it's going to be a very, again, it seems pretty one-sided, but the Pacers have played well at home this season. That's what happens with these young teams, and I think that they can take at least one of these games. I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana's able to take both. I've been saying, coming into the series, I feel like this could be a closer series than people expect. Now, I've always been on the Knicks, but I am sort of waiting for the Pacers to throw their punch, and they've had their chances to, which is maybe a little bit of a death sentence that they haven't been able to capitalize on any of these chances that they've had up to this point. But I do still have this little bit of faith in them to make this more of a series. But for the Knicks as a whole, even if they make it past Indiana, I worry about them in terms of being able to actually win the finals. Now, that's obviously something that, more times than not, if you say you have worries about a team winning the finals, you're probably right. Only one team can take it home. I sort of felt like this was a season to get yourselves right a little bit, but prior to, when they made the OG Anunoby trade, I thought that it was a really nice move to help solidify their roster headed into next season. I do still feel like they are a little bit 1 year away. Now, obviously, they win the playoff series against the Cavaliers last season as a 5 seed, so they, at least seeding-wise, overachieved in that aspect, but especially with all of these injuries piling up, I just don't think that they have the depth. If it's the Celtics that they face, I really don't like their chances there. And then, God forbid they are able to beat the Celtics, I think that the Timberwolves and Nuggets are just on a different tier right now. And listen, I know that the Knicks are sort of America's sweetheart right now, and everybody is falling for them for good reason. Brunson has been, probably, I would say, best or second best player in the playoffs so far. It's a little bit of a debate between he and Anthony Edwards. I would probably lean Brunson, though. The type of performances he's been giving, it's a lot of fun, and it's good to see the Knicks being relevant again. I just feel like we are probably looking at a year-out situation here. And I think that they'll be back, especially in this Eastern Conference, which is on the weaker side. But I don't feel good about the Knicks as things currently stand, trying to balance all of these injuries. We know they've already been dealing with a little bit of a shortened rotation. It was essentially a 6-man rotation the other night, where once Anunoby went down, Thibodeau didn't really have any other choices as to who to play. We finally saw Alec Burks at least step into the game, but only played 1 minute, took 1 shot, so it's not like he is expected to be a part of this run. Precious Achiuwa, who was out of the rotation basically to coming into this series, and in game 1, they're now relying on him for heavy minutes, and I like Achiuwa as well. Thibodeau, I don't think, does quite as much, and he's a good player. I thought that he was an underrated pickup in some, specifically that OG Anunoby deal, and the way that they were able to sort of piece into this. I've talked about all these injuries, and it sort of always, for whatever reason, I feel like Bojan Bogdanovic just always slips my mind. Hasn't gotten a ton of time in a Knicks jersey, but they are also missing him as well, which is a key bench piece. And, Tibbs gets a lot of slack, I think, for the lack of using a bench. We talked about this yesterday on the podcast, the fact that Josh Hart has played 4 entire games so far in their postseason run. That's the most since Jimmy Butler in 2013, I believe, was the year when he was with the Bulls being coached by Tom Thibodeau. So there's obviously a reputation about him maybe overplaying his players a little bit, but at the same time, the Knicks have this chance right now to continue on their postseason run. They are not focused on next year. They are trying to win the games today. And he's giving them the best chance to do so with their stars. You know, I'm a Celtics fan. I sort of wish at times they would lean more heavily on the starters. So as much as it's something that definitely is a conversation point and could have risks in the long run, we saw the way that Joakim Noah was basically worked to the bone and was just never the same player when he was playing under Tibbs in Chicago. But I don't blame him necessarily for the way that things currently stand. Knock on wood that nothing serious does happen long term in terms of the ramifications of sort of the health surrounding these players. But I think that they have to, you know, kind of take their shot as things currently stand. Say hello to our guests right now. But I think that ultimately here, Knicks, they are plus 1,300 to win the NBA Finals. In order to come out of the conference as things currently stand, they are plus 380. So odds definitely not in their favor. But at the same time, you know, I can fully understand if you're Tom Thibodeau, you're not going to punt on this season in the playoffs because you feel like there is possibly a better chance next year. Every single game, they are going to get out there and play the best players available. And they don't necessarily have tons of options off of the bench. Curious to see whether or not Alec Burks could actually, you know, become a player for them. He was actually playing some solid basketball in Detroit. I was frustrated from a developmental standpoint of the Pistons. They are trying to, you know, build up all of these young pieces that they currently have. Why is Alec Burks taking all of these shots? But, you know, for the Knicks, I don't know, maybe he could come in and provide some sort of offense. I know that defense has never really been his strong suit, but something to think about, especially with Jalen Brunson dealing with whatever his injury as well. Again, I would assume that he plays tonight to be able to give the Knicks even a shot to win tonight, because with no OG and with no Brunson in Indiana, I don't know if they would have any sort of a chance, I should say, whatsoever. But let me know in the comment section what you think about this. I feel like, again, championship hopes this year probably aren't there, at least in my eyes, in terms of what the Knicks can do. But I still feel like they do close out this Pacers series, and they can still be a tough out. When Jalen Brunson is playing and to the level that he has been in the beginning of the postseason here, I think that they could easily, you know, make things interesting no matter who the opponent is. But again, let me know what you think in the comment section. That is all we have time for today, though. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back on Monday afternoon, 2 p.m. Eastern. Have a great weekend. Take care. We will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn.